For it seemed in this world the option to be a vampire wasn't the only one. You could also decide to be robotised and become a part of what seemed to be a robotic group. Curiously, it seemed that in this experience I was a vampire to be, and it seemed that once signed up you couldn't back out of it. But I was also part of the robot group too. And again, I was neither robot or vampire, but in a kind of preliminary stage before you become either, like an initiate or such. Seemed the robots and the vampires were not exactly at war with each other, but harboured a deep mistrust and disdain for each other, and each group would be most displeased if they learned I had signed up to both, and so I was keeping this secret. Our car was parked in a parking lot, and while sitting with these three vampires, suddenly one of my robot friends clunked on past and recognised me. He seemed most aggrieved at this, seeing me with the rival vampires, and I knew he would inform his robotic cohorts. As we drove off, I began to ask as to why there was rivalry between vamps and robots, and I began to raise their suspicions, as though I was a robot sympathiser. I decided to let the matter drop, and simply stated how I wouldn't want to be a robot, as all that synthetic material looked rather cumbersome. This seemed to satisfy the suspicious vampires, and we proceeded on. They seemed irritated by my questions, and became rather irate whenever I produced any. We needed refuelling, so we stopped at a kind of dilapidated brick tower. There was a large slug-like creature that took up residence in this building. It was easily the size of 2 buses, I would judge. It was coaxed down by the vampires and dispatched. The oily substance it oozed was apparently a viable fuel source for our vehicle, and so we refueled and continued on. Our final stop took us to a street setting. There were various peoples wandering about. I was told by the vampires that when 2 colourful bursts of light exploded in the sky, that I could ask these 2 dwarfs who stood now in the street, anything I wanted to know, and the answer would be duly given. The bursts of light did indeed occur, but they were very dim, not at all what I was expecting. And then I would awake. Well, as with any experience, it's all for the personal self, that it better recognises the ears through all the viewpoints and comparisons that these experiences provide. I had the sense that I was actually rescuing myself initially from the vampire clutches, or an aspect of my personal self. So it was my real self on the mission, with the personal self along for the ride, as it always is on the real side. Encountering the influence suggested it was some emotional attachment or agreement tapline that I was dealing with here. Usually, the influence would seek to have us maintain our taplines by encouraging the activity or considerations that cause their perpetuation, and surely this would be done more effectively if the influence operates behind the scenes. In this experience, she revealed her identity, and if she had not, I wouldn't have known it was she. Almost as though she knew I was going to remove or attempt to address a tapline, and the general process of awareness I was on could be hampered or interfered with by her or others, but maybe sometimes she just figures how she might let the situation be, than to try and keep an individual locked into a tapline they are adamant to remove, for that must surely be rather tiresome. So she simply glided past, chose to identify herself, and went on her way. So maybe an agreement of a kind, but one that perhaps didn't require her involvement to perpetuate. I had the sense that maybe the astral self had been somehow kidnapped by the vampires as a result of an agreement, and my real self was on a rescue mission. Everything we experience is based on what we decide, in keeping with the cause and effect principle in creation. Perhaps the next scene was the consequence of not retrieving this aspect of the created self, that it would result in being projected into a future lifetime in a curious dimension of humans, vampires, and robots, in keeping with the nature of the idea agreement, the cause that I was attempting to release. For sometimes I have had kidnap attempts from entities, and they could only succeed if I allow it, if I agree to it, and I will disperse them and thwart their attempts with the New You song. Maybe this very night a kidnap attempt was successful, as the individuals took advantage of an agreement in my created consciousness that allowed this to be so. A little how assassins with awareness will pore over the Akashic records and dispatch those who have a karmic death awaiting them, their choices and cause having set them up for such an assassination effect experience, and presumably then the effect consequence for the assassin is less than were they to deal death to one having not created the opportunity for such an experience. A demonstration then of a successful kidnap, an attempted rescue on the real side failing, and the consequence, a projection into a future lifetime. Whatever then was remaining in my created consciousness as agreements, considerations, and attachments not yet released would have resulted into the effect lifetime experience along the lines of this world I found myself now in this experience. For in this world there was no new presentation. The window of opportunity had surely passed by, or was not present in whatever place this was. And yet, because of my intent for the journey of is recognition, seems that even though I may have found myself back in creation, I was still in a more favourable position than those who hadn't begun their process, in that I was able to receive, to be aware of information and insights from the guides or life. The options seemed rather slim in this place: robot, vampire, or human. And although they seemed to be existing in a degree of harmony, there still were tensions between robots and vampires, and all of it was just ideas in creation, and nothing to do with the true reality of the all is. And so, any agreement with any of these options, regardless of the particulars, would have one stuck in creation, as the effects of what they decide with. A little dualistic situation here too, to consider. The robots versus the vampires, and whichever side one chose, be it good or bad or indifferent, the effects would still be experienced due to agreement to creational ideas, despite how they are labelled with other ideas, such as this group is the good guys, and those over there are bad, etc. I had the sense that the vampires were perhaps some representation of Joni and her corporation, as they sought to recruit members. Maybe there was a marketing ploy here after all. On the surface, the vampires looked very human and walked in the daylight, but the underground scene, where the people agreed to join such a group, could be construed as the lower astral, and beyond the awareness of those forward one-dimensional people, but where they are actually positioning themselves in accordance with the agreement to such ideas, and how the leader was a great purple mass of a monster shuffling about in the recesses of the lower astral, perhaps. The robots seemed to be the other option here, and another readily agreed to situation that we see exemplified here on Earth, as people more so become technologically infused and marketed into thinking this to be beneficial. So you could be vampiric or robotic, it would seem, and with a divide between the two. Evidently, the sources of these presented ideas and control of these people were different, but both representing restriction and unconscious trappings in creation. The fact I was in both groups simultaneously demonstrated how, in creation, the personal self jumps from one idea to another, thinking the next will be better, but they are all restricting ideas in creation. But as it is in creation, the personal self wants to experience everything, and perhaps nudged on by the real self to move things along and exhaust all these creational options that the personal self finally seeks to be and see more. And this may have the personal self taking on multiple things at once, only to cause itself more problems, rivalry, suspicion, emotional entanglements, compounding the ideas it is agreeing with, with additional tap-lining emotional charge. If it is unable to remain objective, the dwarfs seemed to be an extension of the marketing ploy of the vampires. How you would glean information and perhaps enlightenment as a result of your affiliation and agreement with them. But the stature of the dwarfs suggested a diminished awareness. Perhaps then the only information you would gain would be very limited and be just personal astral, and the exploding lights in the sky were far dimmer than I imagined they would be. The light of astral knowledge being very secondary to the true light of the ears and the insights that can be gleaned from the connection with this true reality.
Wow, terrific, young man. That was a movie, wasn't it? Yes, thank you so much, Kevin. That's really cool. And yes, we're seeing what's taking place. And also, the influence is very interesting. As I've written about, basically it's her. It can be anything, but basically her through the new books. And there are many sides to the influence. Now, the influence was created because of conscious and unconscious agreement. There's also the Supreme Deceptor that's more so defined in Book 4 of the Adventures of Rebus Artars. But the influence also can, you might say, be on our side once we have enough agreement, because there is an influence there also that's created through the consciousness and creation. This becomes very, very interesting as an ally. So watch for this. And again, everything is about agreement. We have the right to free will to make choices in creation, to recognize or not recognize what's going on. Pretend that it's all La La Land here, and we're just to chase things that, we just keep chasing. That's a choice. Or learn to be now real and wonderful and see all life and no longer be the effect of anything. So what you're presenting, Kevin, is just terrific. Thank you so much.